My name is Alara Whitmore, I'm 26 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing in a courtroom begging for a place to sleep. I grew up in a small Ohio town where neighbors waved at each other and Sunday dinners were sacred. My father was a steelworker, my mother a nurse. I worked hard, studied late, and moved to Cleveland for what I thought was the start of my real life. A marketing job, my first apartment, and the sweet taste of independence. But on a cold Thursday morning, I stood outside my apartment building clutching a trash bag of clothes because my landlord, Mr. Dorsey, had slid an eviction notice under my door. Rent was late. I'd been too sick to work, too broke to pay. Now, I was being tossed out like garbage, my neighbors watching silently as though my shame was contagious. I had begged Mr. Dorsey for more time. I told him my hours were cut, that I was recovering from a fever that kept me in bed for weeks, that I just needed until Friday when my paycheck cleared. But he only sneered, "Business is business, sweetheart. Pay up or pack up." His words sliced through me like glass. He wasn't cruel because he had to be. He enjoyed it. That morning, as movers carried my things onto the curb, my body shook with rage I could not show. My parents didn't answer when I called. My mother sent a text, "We warned you about moving out too soon. Actions have consequences." The one person who cared, my younger sister Maris, was 3 states away in Chicago, struggling to keep her own life together. I stood alone in front of my broken apartment, thinking my life couldn't possibly sink lower. But it did. The next day, a notice appeared on the courthouse website, Alara Whitmore vs. Dorsey Properties, eviction hearing. I barely had bus fare, but I dragged myself into that gray, echoing building with papers crumpled in my purse, sweat sticking to my neck. My shoes squeaked on the polished floor as though mocking my nerves. I had never been in a courtroom before. I imagined judges slamming gavels, lawyers spinning lies, and poor people like me silenced into nothingness. And that's exactly what it felt like when the bailiff called my name. Mr. Dorsey sat smugly at his table, his tie too tight, his smirk too wide. He looked like he'd already won. The judge, a thin man with tired eyes, glanced at the file in front of him. My throat tightened. My whole body screamed that I didn't belong here. But I had no choice. I couldn't go back home. I had no home. When the judge asked me why I had failed to pay rent, my voice trembled. I was sick, I explained. I lost hours at work. I told Mr. Dorsey I just needed until Friday. I wanted to tell him everything. The way Dorsey had laughed, the way he ignored my messages, the way he looked at me like I was disposable. But my words felt small, swallowed by the courtroom air. Mr. Dorsey leaned forward and said with syrupy smugness, "Your Honor, she's irresponsible. She makes excuses. I run a business, not a charity." My stomach burned. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a charity case, that I'd worked since I was 16, that I had never asked for help. But before I could speak, the judge lifted his hand. I braced myself for the gavel, for the cold sentence that would brand me a failure. And then, he asked one question. The room stilled. Papers rustled. Even Mr. Dorsey's grin flickered. The judge leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers and said, "Mr. Dorsey, how many other tenants have you evicted this year?" My heart thumped so loud I thought everyone could hear it. Dorsey's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat. "That's irrelevant," he muttered. But the judge's eyes sharpened. "Answer the question." I gripped the edge of the table, feeling heat crawl up my neck. For the first time, I saw it, the tiny crack in Dorsey's armor. My pulse raced. Something was happening. Something I didn't understand yet, but it was bigger than me. The courtroom was no longer silent. Whispers swept across the benches. The judge pressed further. "This court has received multiple complaints about your management practices," he said evenly. "Before I rule on this eviction, I want clarity on your history." I stared at him, my breath caught in my chest. Multiple complaints? About Dorsey? My landlord wasn't just cruel to me. He'd been cruel to others too. My hands tightened into fists, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe this was the beginning of something else. Dorsey stammered, trying to control the narrative, but his voice shook. The judge's pen scratched across paper. The bailiff leaned forward as if preparing for impact. And I realized, this wasn't just about my rent. This was about power. My chest rose and fell as the judge looked directly at me, his eyes searching mine. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "what you're describing sounds very familiar. Tell me everything that happened between you and this landlord." My throat went dry. My hands trembled. The chance was there, sitting in front of me, waiting to be seized. I could expose him, not just for evicting me, but for every sneer, every threat, every piece of cruelty he had inflicted on people who couldn't fight back. For the first time, Mr. Dorsey looked nervous. For the first time I felt taller than him. And as I opened my mouth to speak, the courtroom doors swung open with a bang. A woman's voice echoed through the chamber. "Your Honor, I have evidence." The entire courtroom turned to look, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw who it was. The woman who burst through the courtroom doors looked nothing like a lawyer. She was older, maybe late 50s, with auburn hair pulled back too tightly and a sharp suit that had seen better days. But in her arms she clutched a thick folder, the edges worn, pages sticking out at odd angles. She strode straight toward the bench without asking permission, her heels striking the floor like a drumbeat. The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her speak." My heart slammed against my ribs. Who was she? Why was she here? The woman turned to me for the briefest moment, her eyes locking on mine. They weren't soft or comforting. They were fierce, burning with the kind of energy that comes from years of fighting battles no one else dared to. "Your Honor," she said, holding up the folder, "this isn't the first time Mr. Dorsey has done this." The courtroom erupted in whispers. I could barely breathe. My landlord's face flushed crimson, his lips twisting as though he'd swallowed something bitter. "Objection!" he barked, his voice trembling. "This woman has nothing to do with this case." The judge's tired eyes suddenly looked alive, sparking with interest. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman straightened her back. "My name is Vivian Caraway. I'm a tenants' rights advocate. And I have documents, sworn statements, complaints, and even photographs, proving a pattern of illegal evictions carried out by this man." The folder slammed against the desk like a weapon. I leaned forward, every cell in my body awake. Illegal evictions? Sworn statements? This was bigger than me losing my apartment. This was systemic. Dorsey wasn't just cruel. He was predatory. And now, in front of everyone, someone was finally calling him out. My blood rushed hot with equal parts fear and exhilaration. Vivian flipped open the folder, pulling out page after page. She spread them across the table, sliding copies toward the judge and the clerk. "Here," she said, her voice steady. "Families thrown out with no notice. Tenants locked out of their homes while their children's toys were still inside. Seniors threatened into signing documents they didn't understand." Each story she recited cracked the courtroom silence like thunder. I could see it in the judge's face. The slow dawning recognition that my eviction wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a chain, a cruel machine. Mr. Dorsey shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar, his smug confidence unraveling. "This is slander," he hissed, but his words carried no weight now. All eyes were on Vivian. I wanted to stand up and thank her, to throw my arms around her, but I stayed frozen. Who had sent her? Why had she chosen to step into my case? The judge leaned forward, fingers drumming against the desk. "Miss Caraway, these are serious allegations." Vivian nodded, calm and unflinching. "They're more than allegations, Your Honor. They're truths your court has overlooked for too long. Mr. Dorsey has built an empire on fear, intimidation, and manipulation. And if you allow him to evict Miss Whitmore today, you're endorsing it." Her words hit me like lightning. I was no longer just a tenant who couldn't pay rent. I was a symbol, standing in the middle of something much bigger. Dorsey slammed his hand against the table. "This is irrelevant to her failure to pay rent." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through the cracks of arrogance. The judge's gaze cut him down. "On the contrary," he said slowly, "this is highly relevant." My pulse roared in my ears. For the first time, it felt like the scales weren't tipped against me. For the first time the truth mattered. But then Vivian said something that twisted the air in the room. She turned toward me, her voice dropping into something almost tender. "Ilara," she said, using my name like she had known it all along, "you're not just a victim here. You're a witness. And your testimony could be the turning point." My chest tightened. Me? A witness? I wasn't a lawyer or an activist. I was just a young woman who'd lost a job, fallen behind on rent, and been humiliated by her landlord. The thought of becoming some kind of voice for justice terrified me. But at the same time, the spark inside me flared. For weeks I had felt powerless, abandoned even by my own parents. And now, here was a woman telling me I could make a difference. I looked down at my trembling hands. Could I really face Dorsey? Could I really step into that role? The judge broke my thoughts. Miss Whitmore, do you wish to testify? His question cut through me like a blade. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for my answer. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to meet the judge's eyes. Yes, I whispered, my voice small. Then louder. Yes, I do. Vivian's eyes flickered with approval. Mr. Dorsey's jaw clenched, his fingers gripping the table as if to keep from losing control. I stood, my knees wobbling, and stepped forward. Every step felt like it echoed through the room, announcing not just my presence, but my decision. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't begging for pity. I was fighting back. And when I sat down at the witness stand, I knew my life was about to change forever. But I didn't know how dangerous that change would be. Dorsey's glare told me he wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Just as I adjusted the microphone, ready to speak, the judge's assistant entered the room with a sealed envelope. She walked quickly to the bench and handed it to him. The judge slid it open, his eyes scanning the contents. His brow furrowed. Then he looked up, his gaze sweeping across the room like a storm cloud. It seems, he said slowly, that there is new evidence submitted to this court. Evidence that may alter everything we are about to hear. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. My heart sank and soared at the same time. New evidence? From whom? About what? I tightened my grip on the stand, my mouth dry. Vivian leaned closer to me, her voice a whisper. Stay steady. Whatever this is, we'll handle it. But my gut twisted, because the judge's next words were directed straight at me. Miss Whitmore, this evidence involves your family. The judge unfolded the letter carefully, his thin fingers trembling just slightly, though his voice carried authority when he spoke. This court has received a signed statement from the Whitmore family, he said. My breath caught in my throat. My family? I hadn't spoken to them since the eviction notice. My mother's last message had been nothing more than a cold dismissal, a reminder that I had brought this on myself. And now, here they were, present in the courtroom through a sealed envelope. Every eye turned toward me, curious, judging, waiting to see how I would react. My heart raced, my palms slick with sweat. It states, the judge continued, that financial assistance was offered to Miss Whitmore but declined. That she willingly chose to neglect her responsibilities. My body went cold. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Declined help? Neglected responsibilities? It was a lie. A betrayal. The courtroom murmured like a hive of bees, restless and suspicious. I shook my head violently. That's not true, I said, my voice breaking. They didn't offer me help. They abandoned me. My words felt too small against the weight of the document in the judge's hands. Mr. Dorsey leaned back in his chair, a slimy grin spreading across his face. He smelled blood in the water. Even her own family knows she's irresponsible, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Rage pulsed through me, hot and suffocating. 4 years, I had lived in the shadow of their expectations, trying to prove I wasn't the failure they claimed I was. And now, instead of saving me, they had handed Dorsey the very weapon he needed to destroy me. I saw Vivian glance at me from across the table, her eyes hardening, her jaw clenched. She whispered, "Don't let them bury you. Not today." Vivian rose from her seat. "Your Honor, with respect, this letter is nothing more than hearsay," she declared, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Miss Whitmore has a right to defend herself against these allegations. A statement without testimony cannot outweigh the lived reality of a tenant facing abuse." The judge considered her words, his eyes narrowing as though weighing invisible scales. But the damage had been done. The courtroom had already tasted blood. Whispers spread, doubt creeping into the faces of strangers who had no idea who I really was. My chest tightened. All my childhood memories rushed back. My father's disapproving frown when I chose art classes over business. My mother's cold silence when I left home. My sister Maris begging me not to go. The letter wasn't just a lie. It was a reflection of how little they had ever believed in me. I was fighting not just Dorsey, but my own blood. The judge turned to me. "Miss Whitmore, do you have anything to say in response to your family's claims?" My throat ached, but I forced the words out. "Yes. I want to say that my parents don't know the truth of my life here. They never asked. They never came when I needed them." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. I didn't decline help. I was never offered it. What they've written is meant to protect themselves, not me. I may not be perfect, but I'm not a liar. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I thought the judge might dismiss me entirely. But then Vivian slid another paper across the table. "Your Honor," she said softly, "we have records of her calls. Days when she reached out. Proof that she tried." She glanced at me briefly, her expression both fierce and kind. My chest tightened with gratitude. For once, someone was standing with me. Mr. Dorsey exploded. "This is outrageous. We're wasting time. The girl didn't pay her rent. That's all that matters." His voice echoed off the marble walls, brittle and desperate. But something had shifted. The smug certainty in his tone was gone, replaced by raw panic. The judge silenced him with a glare. "Mr. Dorsey, sit down." He turned back to me. "Miss Whitmore, your family's statement may cast doubt, but it does not erase the need for this court to examine your landlord's conduct. We will hear your testimony fully." My heart pounded. The chance was still mine. The letter was a knife to my back, but it hadn't killed me yet. I swallowed hard and began to speak about the late-night threats from Dorsey, the ignored maintenance requests, the rent receipts that never added up. Each word I spoke was like releasing a stone I'd been carrying for years. And with every stone dropped, I grew lighter. As I spoke, I noticed something I hadn't before. Reporters. 2 of them, sitting in the back row, scribbling notes. Their pens scratched furiously with each detail. A chill ran through me. This case wasn't just my private hell anymore. It was becoming public. And that terrified me. Because if my family was willing to paint me as irresponsible, what would happen when the whole city heard my story? Would I be seen as the brave young woman standing up to corruption, or the reckless girl who couldn't pay her rent? I fought to keep my voice steady, to bury the fear under layers of defiance. But deep inside, I knew the battle ahead wasn't just about this eviction. It was about my identity, my reputation, my survival. I had been invisible all my life, and now the world was watching. That realization both empowered and terrified me in equal measure. When I finally finished my testimony, my hands ached from gripping the stand so tightly. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. Vivian placed her hand lightly on my shoulder as I sat down, her touch grounding me. Mr. Dorsey shuffled his papers furiously, sweat glistening on his forehead. For once, he looked smaller than me. But then the judge cleared his throat, and the sound was sharp as a gunshot. "This case is far from over," he said. "We will adjourn for today and reconvene tomorrow morning." Relief and dread washed over me all at once. One more night of waiting, of not knowing. The bailiff announced the adjournment, and people began to rise, their chatter filling the air. I stood shakily, my knees weak, my mind buzzing with questions. But as I turned to leave, I froze. Because standing in the doorway, watching me with unreadable eyes, was my sister, Maris. Maris hadn't changed much since I last saw her. Still petite, still carrying herself with a quiet strength that seemed out of place in our family. But there was something different in her eyes, something guarded, like she'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. She stood just inside the doorway, her coat half-buttoned, her hair tangled from the wind, and for a moment I thought I was imagining her. My little sister, 3 states away in Chicago, was suddenly here in this Cleveland courtroom. My mouth opened, but no words came. She looked at me without smiling, her face unreadable. Vivian noticed her too, raising an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Sister," I croaked. The word tasted strange. Because even though Maris was blood, I hadn't felt close to her in years. Not since the night I left home and she whispered, "Take me with you," and I didn't. I followed Maris into the hallway after court adjourned, my heart racing. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced around before answering, like she was afraid someone might hear. I came because I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Her voice was soft, but her words cut through me. That letter the court read. It wasn't from me. Mom and Dad sent it without telling me. I only found out yesterday. And Alara. She hesitated, her eyes filling with something I couldn't name. They've been lying about more than just you. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I pressed. She shook her head, whispering, Not here. It's bigger than you think. Fear and anger twisted inside me like barbed wire. My own parents had betrayed me publicly, and now my sister was hinting at secrets darker than I could imagine. I needed answers, but Maris wasn't ready to give them. We walked outside into the biting Cleveland air. Snow clung to the edges of the courthouse steps, melting into dirty puddles on the sidewalk. Maris hugged her coat tight around her as we stood under a flickering streetlight. They told me not to come, she said, her voice trembling. Said this wasn't my fight. But Alara, it is. Because what Dorsey's been doing, it ties back to Dad. The words slammed into me like a punch. Dad, I whispered. She nodded. Dorsey didn't just pick you randomly. He knows Dad. They've done business together for years. The evictions, the properties, it's all connected. My knees nearly buckled. Images of Dad at the dinner table, hands calloused from steelwork, his gruff lectures about responsibility. How could that same man be linked to Dorsey's cruelty? I felt dizzy, the world tilting under my feet. No, I said weakly. But Maris's eyes told me it was true. I wanted to scream to deny it, but my sister's words clung to me like ice. Why are you only telling me this now? I demanded, my voice rising. Maris flinched. Because I was scared. Because Dad threatened me if I ever talked. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, her hands shaking. This is proof. She pressed it into my hand. It was a copy of a contract, the ink slightly smudged, but the signatures clear. At the bottom, Dorsey Properties and Richard Whitmore. My father's name. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just connected. He was complicit. He had been feeding me to the wolves while pretending to wash his hands of my choices. A scream clawed at my throat, but only a whisper came out. He did this to me. Maris's eyes filled with tears. Yes, and I think he's done it to others too. The truth was worse than betrayal. It was conspiracy. My fingers trembled as I clutched the contract, the paper cutting into my skin. Vivian stepped out of the courthouse doors then, spotting us. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she took in our faces. Everything okay? She asked cautiously. I didn't know how to answer, but Maris stepped forward. You need to see this, she said, handing the contract to Vivian. The advocate scanned it quickly, her jaw tightening. Damn it, she muttered. This explains so much. She looked at me then, her voice low but urgent. Alara, this isn't just about your eviction anymore. This is about corruption. Your father and Dorsey have been running a scheme, probably for years. And if we can prove it, we're not just fighting to save your home. We're fighting to take down both of them. My chest heaved, torn between grief and fury. My father. My landlord. Two men who should have protected me, conspiring to ruin me instead. The three of us huddled under the streetlight, the city noise swirling around us. Cars honked, snow slushed under tires, but in that circle of light, the world felt like it had narrowed to a single burning truth. What do we do now? I asked, my voice cracking. Vivian's eyes gleamed. We build a case. We gather every tenant he's ever hurt, every contract he's ever signed, every piece of evidence that ties him to your father. We expose them both. My stomach churned. Expose Dad. The words felt unnatural in my mouth. Despite everything, some part of me still saw him as the man who built treehouses and patched my bike tires. But another part, the part that had been abandoned, belittled, betrayed, burned with hunger for justice. If he's guilty, I whispered, then yes, we expose him. Maris looked at me with both fear and relief. And in her eyes, I saw my own reflection, broken but rising. Just as Vivian tucked the contract into her folder, a black SUV rolled slowly past the courthouse, its tinted windows glinting under the streetlight. The car lingered too long, idling at the curb before pulling away into the darkness. My skin prickled. Did you see that? I asked. Vivian nodded grimly. Yeah, They're watching us now. Maris shivered, pulling her coat tighter. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Whoever was inside that SUV wasn't a stranger. They were connected to this, maybe even sent by my father or Dorsey. The realization struck like lightning. The moment we chose to fight, we became dangerous. And dangerous people attract enemies. Vivian looked at both of us, her face set with determination. We need to move fast. They won't sit back and let us win. I glanced at Maris, fear knotting in my stomach. Because I knew, deep down, the war had only just begun. The next morning, the sky over Cleveland was the color of ash, heavy clouds pressing low as if the whole city was holding its breath. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black SUV idling outside the courthouse, its shadow stretching long across the pavement. Maris had crashed on my couch at Vivian's office, the only safe place Vivian could think of for us. I lay awake listening to the city hum outside, my body restless, my mind gnawing on the truth like a wound that wouldn't close. My own father was in business with the man trying to destroy me. The man who'd tossed me into the street and sneered while I begged for mercy. When dawn finally broke, Vivian was already pacing the office, coffee in hand, files spread across the desk. Today, she said firmly, we go on the offensive. My stomach twisted. Offensive meant war. Vivian outlined the plan like a general preparing troops. Step 1. Gather allies. Tenants, former tenants, anyone Dorsey has harmed. If we can show this isn't isolated, the court will be forced to act. She jabbed her finger at the folder holding my father's contract. Step 2. Find financial links, bank records, transfers, anything connecting Dorsey and your father. If we can prove collusion, we've got them cornered. I listened, every word burning itself into me. For years I had lived reactively, surviving crisis after crisis, waiting for the world to let me breathe. But Vivian's voice was different. It was sharp, decisive, alive with purpose. We're not just going to defend you, she said, eyes blazing. We're going to expose them. Maris leaned forward, her voice quieter but firm. I know people. Tenants' dads forced out. Families who lost everything. They're scared, but if we reach them, maybe they'll talk. Hope flickered inside me. Just maybe. That afternoon, the three of us drove across the city, stopping at rundown buildings with peeling paint and broken mailboxes. Every address had the same story. Evictions, intimidation, despair. At the first building, an elderly woman named Mrs. Klein opened her door with wary eyes. You're not with Dorsey, are you? She asked, her voice shaking. Vivian gently showed her a card, explaining who we were. Slowly, Mrs. Klein let us in. Her apartment was sparse, the air heavy with the smell of mildew. She told us how Dorsey had raised her rent suddenly, then threatened to evict her when she couldn't pay. I worked 30 years at the post office, she whispered, tears in her eyes. And he treated me like trash. Vivian scribbled notes, nodding with empathy. I sat frozen, anger boiling inside me. Each story we collected was another stone in the wall we were building against him. But it was also another scar, another weight. By the fourth stop, I felt the stories crushing me. Families ripped apart, children crying as their toys were thrown into the street, elderly tenants left homeless in winter. Maris squeezed my hand when she noticed my shaking. Don't lose yourself in it, she murmured. But I couldn't stop imagining myself in every single story. Because I was them. Dorsey hadn't just taken my home. He'd taken my dignity, my sense of safety. And now I understood. He wasn't a landlord. He was a predator. Vivian's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. The more victims we find, the stronger our case. But remember, Elara, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for them too. Her words hit me like a tidal wave. For years I had felt like nothing, like my voice didn't matter. And now, suddenly my voice was the weapon. It terrified me. But it also made me stronger. Stronger than I'd ever been. As night fell, we returned to Vivian's office exhausted but alive with energy. Papers, notes, and statements covered the desk. Vivian sorted them with methodical precision, while Maris brewed weak coffee in the tiny kitchenette. I leaned against the window, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar. Momentum. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building. But then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A low voice spoke on the other end, calm and chilling. Stop digging, Elara. Go back to your life. If you don't, you'll lose more than an apartment. My breath caught. Who is this? Silence, then a click. The line went dead. My hands shook as I lowered the phone. Maris's face drained of color when she saw me. What happened? She whispered. I swallowed hard. They know. They're watching every move we make. And they weren't bluffing. Vivian grabbed the phone, her jaw set. This is intimidation. Classic tactic. It means we're hitting a nerve. But I wasn't comforted. My father's face flashed in my mind, his stern eyes, his hard voice. Was it him? Was he the one pulling strings, trying to silence me? Or was it Dorsey, desperate to keep his empire intact? Either way, the message was clear. We were in danger. That night, Vivian insisted we stay together. She locked every door, checked every window, her paranoia wrapping around us like armor. Maris curled up on the couch, clutching a blanket. I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, the phone call echoing in my ears. You'll lose more than an apartment. What did that mean? My job? My reputation? My sister? I hugged myself tightly, a vow forming inside me. They wanted me scared, small, silent. But I had been all those things before. Not anymore. Not again. The next morning, before the sun had risen, someone pounded on the office door. The sound rattled through the small space, jerking us awake. Vivian was on her feet instantly, motioning for us to stay back. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. My heart thundered in my chest, every horror movie I'd ever seen replaying in my mind. Who is it? Vivian called, her voice steady. Silence. Then a male voice, muffled but sharp. Open up. This is official business. I crept closer, adrenaline flooding my veins. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a figure in a dark coat, something glinting in his hand. Vivian unlocked the door cautiously, her body tense. The man stepped inside, flashing a badge. Detective Harlan, he said, his eyes scanning the room. I need to speak to Elara Whitmore immediately. My knees nearly buckled. A detective? My stomach dropped. Because his next words weren't about Dorsey. They were about my father. Detective Harlan stepped inside the cramped office with an authority that swallowed the air. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, with tired eyes that seemed to carry more secrets than he'd ever confess. His badge flashed briefly before he tucked it back into his coat. I sat frozen on the edge of the couch, Maris clutching my hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. Vivian closed the door behind him, her movements slow, deliberate. Detective, she said evenly, what's your business here? His gaze landed on me, heavy and unyielding. Miss Whitmore, he said, I'm here because your father's name has come up in an ongoing investigation. And you're part of it now, whether you like it or not. My breath caught in my throat. It was one thing to suspect my father was tied to Dorsey. It was another to hear it confirmed by law enforcement. My world tilted, collapsing in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Harlan pulled a thin folder from his coat, tossing it onto Vivian's desk with a dull thud. Papers spilled out, photographs clipped to reports. My eyes darted across them. Buildings in ruin, eviction notices stamped in red, bank statements with numbers that made my head spin. At the bottom of one page, clear as day, was my father's signature. My stomach twisted. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling. Harlan's eyes softened only slightly. Evidence. Enough to raise questions, not enough to convict. Your father has been working with Dorsey for years, laundering money through property deals, fast-tracking evictions to flip apartments, skimming profits off the backs of tenants. We've been tracking Dorsey, but your father? He's careful. He uses family to cover his tracks. His words landed like punches. Family. That meant me. That meant Maris. A chill crept through me as I realized just how deep his betrayal went. Vivian leaned over the desk, scanning the documents. Why bring this to her? She asked sharply. Harlan didn't flinch. Because her testimony could be the key. If she speaks about what she's endured, about the patterns she's seen, it strengthens our case. But understand this. His voice dropped low, almost a warning. The moment you go against Richard Whitmore, you're not just fighting a crooked landlord. You're fighting a man with deep pockets and deeper connections. He won't play fair. My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. My father wasn't just complicit. He was dangerous. I thought back to the black SUV outside the courthouse, the threatening phone call. Maybe it wasn't just Dorsey pulling strings. Maybe it was Dad. My chest tightened, grief and fury warring inside me. How could the man who raised me be the same man destroying me? How could blood feel colder than a stranger's cruelty? Maris spoke before I could. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp. I told you, she whispered. He threatened me too. That's why I ran. That's why I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She turned to Harlan, eyes blazing. You want testimony? You'll have mine. He bullied us our whole lives, and now he's bullying a whole city. Enough is enough. My throat ached with unshed tears. Hearing my sister speak with such defiance filled me with both pride and sorrow. We were united now, standing against the man who should have protected us. But Harlan's eyes darkened. If you testify, you'll both become targets. Dorsey won't take the fall alone, and your father won't let you destroy what he's built. People who get in their way tend to disappear. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. I glanced at Maris, her hand trembling in mine. We weren't just witnesses. We were prey. And predators were circling. Vivian broke the silence, her voice calm but fierce. Then we make noise so loud they can't silence it. If this goes public, if the press gets involved, it becomes harder for them to make us vanish quietly. Harlan frowned. Public exposure can protect you, but it can also paint a target on your back. Once this story hits the papers, there's no undoing it. He looked directly at me. Ilara, this choice is yours. Stay quiet and survive, or speak up and risk everything. My chest tightened as every memory of betrayal flooded back. My parents ignoring my collapse at work, Dorsey tossing me onto the street, the letter that painted me a liar. Silence had already cost me everything. What more could I lose? My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. I'm not staying quiet anymore. The room stilled. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my own courage. Harlan nodded slowly, almost with respect. Then understand this. Once you step into this, there's no going back. He slid a business card across the table. If you get another threat, another call, anything out of the ordinary, call me first. His gaze flickered to Maris, then Vivian, before settling on me again. You'll need to be careful. Especially with who you trust. With that, he gathered his papers, tucked them into his coat, and left the office, the door closing softly behind him. The room was silent for a long time. The only sound the hum of the radiator. Maris let out a shaky breath. Vivian rubbed her temples, muttering, We're in deeper than I thought. I sat frozen, staring at the card Harlan had left. My name suddenly felt heavier, like it wasn't mine anymore. I was no longer just a Lara Whitmore. I was the daughter of the enemy. And I had chosen war. That night, as the city lights flickered outside Vivian's office window, sleep evaded me again. Every sound made me jump, every shadow felt like a threat. Maris slept curled on the couch, her chest rising and falling steadily. Vivian sat at her desk, typing furiously, her face lit by the glow of her laptop. I stood at the window, staring at the streets below. That's when I saw it again. The black SUV. Parked across the street, its engine idling, headlights off. My breath caught. They weren't hiding anymore. Whoever was inside wanted me to know they were there. I felt the weight of Harlan's warning pressing down on me. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was surveillance. I whispered to myself, barely audible. Dad, what are you doing? And as if in answer, my phone buzzed on the windowsill. A new message lit up the screen. 3 words that froze my blood. We're coming tonight. The message glowed on my phone screen like a curse. We're coming tonight. My stomach twisted, and the blood drained from my face. I stood frozen at the window, staring at the black SUV across the street. The engine was still running, its shadow blending into the darkness, like a beast waiting to strike. Behind me, Maris stirred, sensing the tension. What is it? She asked groggily. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. Vivian turned from her laptop, immediately reading the terror on my face. "What happened?" she demanded, rising from her chair. I showed them the message. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then Vivian grabbed her phone. "We're not waiting. I'm calling Harlan." But as she dialed, the SUV's headlights flicked on, blinding white beams piercing through the blinds. It wasn't just a threat anymore. They weren't waiting for tomorrow. They were here. Vivian cursed under her breath. "Get away from the window." She pulled the blinds shut and motioned for us to move. My legs felt like lead, but Maris grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the couch. Vivian's voice was calm, almost eerily so, but I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Lock the doors. Now." Maris sprinted to the front, sliding the chain lock into place. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a desperate drum. Vivian spoke into her phone, low and urgent. "Detective Harlan, it's me. They're outside." "Yes, tonight." A pause then. "We'll hold until you get here." She hung up and turned to us. 15 minutes. "He'll be here in 15 minutes. But 15 minutes suddenly felt like a lifetime. A car door slammed outside. Then another. Footsteps echoed on the pavement. My skin prickled. Whoever was out there wasn't knocking politely. They were coming. The first bang shook the door like thunder. Maris shrieked, stumbling back. I grabbed her hand instinctively, both of us clinging to each other like children. Vivian held her ground, her jaw set, though her hands trembled. "Stay behind me," she ordered. The banging grew louder, harder, the chain lock rattling with each strike. My breath came fast and shallow. I thought of my father, of his cold expression when I left home, of the letter that condemned me. Was this his way of sending me a message? His way of silencing me before I could speak? I felt my throat tighten, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. Another crash. The door frame groaned, splintering under the pressure. "They're not waiting for Harlan," Vivian hissed. "They're forcing their way in." My body trembled violently, every nerve screaming for me to run. But there was nowhere to go. We were trapped. Glass shattered in the back. The sound was sharp, piercing, final. They weren't just at the door, they were circling the building. My stomach dropped. "They're inside," Maris whispered, her voice barely audible. Vivian scanned the room, her eyes landing on the hallway. "The bedroom. Go now." We scrambled, feet pounding against the hardwood as we rushed down the narrow hall. Vivian slammed the bedroom door shut behind us and locked it. The room was small, claustrophobic. A dresser pressed against one wall, a narrow bed against the other. The air was thick, suffocating, heavy with fear. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, straining to hear the sound of boots against glass, of heavy steps crossing the floor. They were inside. I clutched Maris's hand so tightly it hurt. My mind raced. If these men worked for Dorsey for Dad, what would they do when they found us? Would we even survive the night? The footsteps drew closer, slow and deliberate, like hunters stalking prey. The floorboards creaked under their weight, each groan cutting through the silence. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought it might give us away. Vivian pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes blazing with determination. She grabbed a heavy lamp from the nightstand, gripping it like a weapon. My chest tightened at the sight. This woman wasn't just my attorney anymore. She was our shield. A low voice echoed from the living room, muffled but chilling. "Search everywhere. She's here." The voice wasn't Dorsey's, but it carried the same venom. Maris's breathing grew shallow, her body trembling against mine. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words caught in my throat. We weren't safe. Not yet. Not until Harlan arrived. And each passing second stretched into eternity, every creak of the floorboards another nail in my coffin. The door handle rattled violently. Maris gasped, and I slapped my hand over her mouth, muffling the sound. The lock strained as someone pounded from the other side, the wood shuddering under the force. "Open it," a voice growled. Vivian raised the lamp higher, her arms steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. My entire body shook, sweat dripping down my spine. I thought of every moment that had led here, the eviction, the courtroom, my family's betrayal. I thought of how silence had strangled me my whole life. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't want to die cowering against a wall. Not anymore. If they get in, I whispered to Maris, we fight. Her eyes widened, tears streaking her cheeks, but she nodded. We weren't just victims anymore. We were survivors in the making. And survivors claw their way out, no matter the cost. The pounding grew louder. The door cracked. Then, sirens. Distant but rising, echoing through the night. Red and blue lights flickered against the curtains, pulsing like a heartbeat. The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. Heavy footsteps retreated, fast and frantic. Glass crunched under boots as shadows fled the way they came. Vivian yanked open the door, rushing into the hallway. I followed, my chest heaving, Maris gripping my arm. By the time we reached the living room, the intruders were gone. The SUV's engine roared outside, tires screeching against pavement. They vanished into the night just as Harlan's unmarked car skidded to a stop. He stormed inside, gun drawn, eyes blazing with fury. Are you hurt? He barked. I shook my head, though my knees threatened to give way. His gaze swept the broken glass, the splintered doorframe, the wreckage they left behind. His jaw tightened. They won't stop now. You need to decide, are you ready to take them down for good? Detective Harlan's words hung in the air like smoke. Are you ready to take them down for good? My chest heaved, my hands still trembling from the break-in. Maris sat on the couch, her face pale, clutching a throw pillow as if it could protect her. Vivian leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her eyes sharp, unreadable. My gaze shifted between them, my heart pounding. For weeks I had been fighting just to survive, taking each blow and hoping it wouldn't destroy me. But tonight proved survival wasn't enough. These people, my landlord, my father, their enforcers, they wanted me silent, broken, erased. If I stayed quiet, I would spend the rest of my life waiting for the next knock, the next shadow in the dark. I swallowed hard, my voice low but steady. I'm ready. No more hiding. My words didn't feel like surrender. They felt like the beginning of war. Harlan nodded slowly, studying me. Good. But understand this. Once you step forward, there's no going back. They'll come harder. Dirtier. They'll try to smear your name, ruin your job, your reputation. His eyes narrowed. They may even go after your sister. Maris's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. I gripped her hand tightly, silently promising I wouldn't let them touch her. They already tried to kill us, I whispered. What's worse than that? Harlan's jaw clenched. Exposure. They'll try to make you the villain. They'll turn every misstep into a weapon. Vivian stepped forward then, her voice firm. That's why we'll control the story before they do. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents, leases, complaints, records she'd been compiling for weeks. We take this to the press, the courts, the people. We tell Alara's story before they can twist it. My stomach knotted. My life would no longer be mine. The decision weighed heavy, like a stone pressing into my chest. I thought of my parents, of the cold silence from my mother, the letter from my father that had thrown me into this nightmare. Would going public shame them? Would it finally force them to see me? Or would they dig deeper into their lies, painting me as the ungrateful daughter who deserved everything she got? I thought of the neighbors who'd turned away during my eviction, afraid to intervene. Would they finally see what kind of man Dorsey really was? Or would they blame me again, because it was easier than facing the truth? My throat tightened. I had lived my whole life craving approval, chasing scraps of affection from people who would never give it freely. Maybe this was my chance to stop chasing. Maybe this was the only way to stand tall, even if it meant standing alone. Vivian's eyes softened as she watched me wrestle with the choice. Alara, she said gently, this isn't just about you anymore. Think of the tenants who've been silenced, the families broken, the people too scared to fight. Your story could be their voice. Her words struck deep, a reminder that my suffering wasn't isolated. Dorsey's cruelty wasn't unique, it was systematic, woven into every eviction, every ruined life. I looked at Maris, her face still pale, but her eyes steady. I'll stand with you, she whispered, squeezing my hand. My chest ached with both fear and gratitude. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I turned back to Harlan, my voice firmer this time. Tell me what I need to do." He leaned forward, his tone grave. "We start tomorrow. Press conference. You'll speak your truth. But once you do, they'll hit back harder than ever." My spine straightened. Let them. The night stretched long after Harlan left, patrol cars circling the block to ward off another attack. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house set my nerves on fire. But beneath the fear, a strange calm settled. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. I was preparing to save myself. Maris drifted off on the couch, exhaustion pulling her under. Vivian stayed awake beside me, her laptop glowing as she drafted a statement. "They'll tear you apart," she murmured, not looking up. "But if you stand firm, you can win." I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, wondered how she carried so much steel in her veins. "Why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. She paused, then looked up, her eyes dark with something unspoken. "Because I've seen men like Dorsey win too many times. Not this time. Not with you." Morning came too quickly, sunlight bleeding through shattered blinds, illuminating the wreckage of the night before. Broken glass glittered across the floor like cruel confetti. I swept it into piles, my movements mechanical, my mind elsewhere. Today everything would change. Vivian handed me a carefully typed statement, but my hands shook as I held it. "It has to be your voice," she said. "You don't have to read it word for word, but let it guide you." Maris appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her face pale but determined. "We're with you," she said softly. I looked between them, my sister and the attorney who had become my unlikely ally, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of strength. Today the world would hear me. Today silence would end. I pressed the statement to my chest, inhaled deeply and whispered to myself, "This is where I fight back." By the time we arrived at the courthouse steps, a crowd had already gathered. Reporters with microphones, cameras flashing, curious onlookers whispering behind their hands. My stomach churned, but my spine stayed straight. Harlan flanked one side of me, Vivian the other, their presence like armor. As I stepped up to the podium, the noise dimmed. Dozens of eyes fixed on me. My throat tightened, my palms damp. I unfolded the paper, glanced at the neatly typed lines, and then set it aside. My voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with each word. "My name is Elara Whitmore. I was evicted illegally, threatened, and nearly silenced. But I am not the only one." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Behind the cameras, I saw shadows moving. Men in dark suits, watching. My pulse quickened, but I didn't falter. Today, I will not be silent anymore. And as the words left my mouth, I knew there was no turning back. The silence after my words barely lasted a heartbeat. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust closer, cameras clicking like gunfire. My chest heaved, but I forced my voice to stay steady, repeating what I had endured, what others had endured under Dorsey's control. When I finished, the crowd erupted in noise, some cheering, some skeptical, some demanding proof. Vivian quickly gathered the reporters, promising documents and testimony. Harlan whispered, "You did good." But as we walked back inside the courthouse, I spotted him. Mr. Dorsey stood at the edge of the crowd, his lips curved into a snake smile. Beside him, in a tailored suit and polished shoes, was my father. My knees nearly buckled. He hadn't come when I was evicted. He hadn't come when I begged for help. But here he was, arm in arm with the man who had destroyed me. My stomach twisted. This was no coincidence. This was war. Hours later, their attack came swift and brutal. A local news station aired a segment. Landlord accused of abuse faces tenant with troubled past. My photo appeared on screen, alongside a headline dripping with venom. The anchor smiled politely as she read from the teleprompter. Elara Whitmore, a 26-year-old former tenant, claims she was unfairly evicted. But records show she has a history of financial irresponsibility, including late rent payments and a credit score in the low 500s. Her father, respected businessman Leonard Whitmore, has called his daughter's accusations false and shameful. My chest constricted. The screen flashed to an interview. My father, his face solemn, voice heavy with rehearsed disappointment. "My daughter has always struggled to accept responsibility. Mr. Dorsey is a good man who has given her multiple chances. This is nothing more than an attempt to deflect from her own failures. The words burned worse than any eviction notice ever had. I dropped the remote, my hands trembling. Maris gasped, tears springing to her eyes. He's siding with Dorsey? Vivian's jaw tightened. Of course he is. Dorsey needs credibility, and your father's reputation gives it to him. I shook my head, choking back sobs. He called me a liar on television. My own father. Maris wrapped her arms around me, but her comfort couldn't erase the sting. The phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from old classmates, co-workers, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some messages were kind, but many dripped with judgment. Why would your dad lie? Maybe you're exaggerating. You should have paid your rent. The world didn't see the bruises of fear, the nights I went hungry, the threats whispered through my door. They saw a story spun by men with money and power. For the first time I understood the depth of their cruelty. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to erase me. Vivian paced the living room like a lion trapped in a cage. We knew they'd come for you, but not this fast. Harlan arrived minutes later. His face dark with anger. They're running a smear campaign. If we don't move fast, they'll bury her. I sat frozen, staring at the flickering news screen. They have everything, I whispered. My father's respect, Dorsey's money, the press. Who's going to believe me now? Harlan knelt beside me, his voice low but fierce. Ilara, listen to me. They only attack this hard when they're afraid. You've hit a nerve. That means you're winning. His words were strong, but doubt gnawed at me. Was I really winning? Or was I just giving them more ammunition? I thought of my mother, watching silently somewhere, refusing to defend me. Did she believe him too? My heart cracked wider. Family was supposed to be your shield. Mine had become the knife. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face on the television, his voice condemning me with calm precision. False and shameful. The words repeated like a curse. I remembered being little, climbing into his lap after scraping my knee, his arms strong and safe. When did that man disappear? Or had he never been real at all? I stared at the ceiling, rage boiling beneath the grief. Maybe they could smear my name. Maybe they could make me look weak. But they couldn't erase the truth. I thought of the tenants Vivian had uncovered. Families displaced, children left homeless, elders thrown into shelters. Their stories mattered too. If I gave up now, I wasn't just abandoning myself. I was abandoning them. My pulse quickened. They wanted me broken. Instead, they had lit something dangerous inside me. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Vivian thrust a stack of papers into my hands. We leaked these, she said. Tenant testimonies, complaint records, evidence of illegal practices. If they want to play dirty, we'll drown them in truth. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the documents. Handwritten letters, court filings, photos of mold-ridden apartments. Real lives, real suffering. I looked up at her, fear and determination warring in my chest. If we do this, they'll come harder. Vivian's eyes flashed. Let them. We'll make sure they choke on their own lies. Maris placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Ilara, you're not alone in this anymore. They've underestimated you. That's their mistake. I swallowed hard, nodding. My voice felt steadier than it had in days. Okay, then let's burn their story down and build ours in its place. Vivian's lips curved into a grim smile. Now you're starting to sound like me. By noon, the first leaks hit social media. Anonymous accounts posted scanned complaints against Dorsey. Stories from tenants who had been silenced or ignored. Photos of broken heaters in the dead of winter, cockroach infestations, children coughing from black mold. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag Dorsey exposed. Hashtag justice for tenants. And then the most damning piece of all, a video of Dorsey berating an elderly woman, his voice dripping with cruelty as she begged for more time to pay. The internet lit up with outrage. Reporters who had doubted me were suddenly calling for interviews. But with the attention came danger. My phone buzzed with threats, anonymous voices hissing through the line. You'll regret this. We know where you live. Each word chilled me, but beneath the fear, a fire burned hotter. They had thrown everything at me. Shame, lies, betrayal. But I was still standing. And for the first time, I realized, maybe I wasn't just surviving. Maybe I was winning. The city seemed alive with a mixture of anger and curiosity. Social media was buzzing, news outlets calling, and strangers began emailing with stories of Dorsey's past abuses. My inbox overflowed with support and outrage. For the first time, I felt the weight of public attention, the kind that could protect me, but also the kind that made me a target. Harlan had stationed officers around Vivian's office, trying to keep us safe, but I knew it was a fragile shield. Every shadow outside made me flinch, every unexpected knock sent my heart racing. Even with the momentum on our side, danger was closing in. And I couldn't forget the black SUV, the threats, the sense that someone close to me, someone who shared my blood, had already chosen to side with my enemies. My father. He wasn't just a threat in the abstract anymore. He was a predator stalking me personally. Vivian paced, a storm contained within her movements. "We have to keep pushing," she said, eyes dark with determination. "The public is on our side, but they'll also dig for any weakness. Dorsey and your father will try to discredit you. You must be untouchable." I nodded, trying to absorb her words, but the fear kept clawing at my chest. Maris sat beside me, her hands trembling as she scrolled through emails from former tenants. "Ilara," she whispered. "Look at this." Screenshots of Dorsey berating families, letters from tenants who had been evicted illegally. Even one video of my father meeting with Dorsey behind closed doors. The evidence was growing. And yet, seeing my father's face there, calmly complicit, sent a cold wave through me. I wanted to scream, to run, to confront him, but I knew he was calculating, and reckless action would be the same as surrender. By midday, the first wave of threats arrived. Anonymous emails, phone calls, messages posted on social media. "Stop now or pay the price," one read. Another, "We're watching. You have no one to protect you." My hands shook as I read them aloud to Vivian. She gritted her teeth. "They're scared. That's why they're trying to intimidate you. Fear is a weapon, but you've survived worse." Harlan called a brief meeting with us in a secure room. "They're escalating, and it won't stop until they feel threatened," he warned. "Your father is deeply involved. Dorsey has resources. Expect people to try to infiltrate your circle, maybe even your home." I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed for me to flee, to hide, but I knew running would only give them the victory. If I backed down now, everything we'd fought for, the truth, the tenants' voices, my own dignity, would be lost. The day stretched into evening, the city lights blinking on like watchful eyes. We prepared for a press conference, setting cameras, arranging documents, organizing witness testimonies. Each moment was electric with tension. Every shadow seemed sinister. As I adjusted my jacket in the mirror, Maris approached. "Ilara, are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked softly. I looked at her, feeling the fire in my chest. "I don't have a choice," I admitted. "If I stay quiet, I lose everything. If I speak, I might lose everything, but at least I'm fighting." She nodded, her grip firm on my arm. Vivian entered with a folder full of statements, her face set with focus. "They'll come for us tonight," she warned. "They'll try to spin lies, intimidate, and distract. But we're ready. This is our moment. Don't let fear take it from you." As the cameras rolled, I spoke with a voice stronger than I felt. "I am Ilara Whitmore. I am one of the tenants who was evicted illegally by Dorsey Properties, with the complicity of my father, Leonard Whitmore. I have survived threats, lies, and betrayal. And I will not be silent." Reporters scribbled furiously, microphones hovered, and cameras flashed. Social media erupted immediately. The public response was electric. Messages of support poured in from strangers, former tenants, even people I'd never met. But even amid the support, my phone buzzed constantly with anonymous threats. Shadows of men passing my building, calls from unknown numbers. I realized the battle had moved beyond courts and documents. This was a war for survival. And every move I made, they would try to predict, control, and destroy. Then came the first violent escalation. Around 10 p.m., the office door rattled violently. Someone slammed it with enough force to shake the walls. I froze, Maris clutching my arm, eyes wide. Harlan and two officers immediately responded. their presence tense but insufficient to ward off what came next. Heavy footsteps circled the office, glass shattering from the front windows. Fear surged through me like electricity, but beneath it, a strange calm settled. I wouldn't run. Not tonight. Not ever again. Vivian grabbed a metal rod from the supply closet. Maris and I pressed ourselves behind the desk, ready. And then I saw it, through the shattered blinds, silhouettes moving in the darkness, purposeful and menacing. Their target was clear. Me. And I knew one thing with certainty. We couldn't let them leave this night victorious. Hours later, after the intruders retreated into the darkness, the damage was clear. Broken windows, splintered furniture, chaos that left us rattled but alive. Harlan debriefed us, his face grim. They're coming back, and next time they won't be subtle. Expect Dorsey's men, expect threats from your father's associates, expect everything. You're officially in their crosshairs. I sat silently, feeling a new resolve harden in my chest. Fear had been the only thing keeping me from confronting my father, from challenging Dorsey, from claiming my own voice. But that fear was gone now, replaced with rage and purpose. Maris squeezed my hand. "We can do this," she whispered. I nodded, staring at the chaos around us. "We will. We have no choice." And in that moment, I knew the real fight, the one for survival, for justice, and for revenge, was only beginning. The morning after the attack, the office smelled of cold coffee and broken glass. The remnants of last night's chaos were a constant reminder. Our enemies were bold, ruthless, and relentless. Harlan stationed officers outside every exit, but the fear was no longer paralyzing, it was fuel. Vivian handed me a thick folder of evidence collected from tenants, financial records, and hidden dealings between Dorsey and my father. "Today," she said, voice sharp as a blade, "we don't react. We act." Maris watched me, her eyes wide with trust and worry. I inhaled deeply, gripping the folder, letting the weight of all we'd gathered settle in my hands. The moment for revenge had arrived. Not the petty, emotional kind, but calculated, unstoppable, and precise. The people who had tried to destroy me would soon learn that I was no longer a victim. I was the storm they had failed to anticipate. Vivian laid out the plan like a battlefield map. First, we would confront the tenants directly, gathering sworn statements, photographs, and testimony. Then, we would release a coordinated exposé to the press and social media, leaving no room for Dorsey or my father to twist the story. "This is a chess game," Vivian explained, tapping her finger on the folder. "Each move must be deliberate. Timing is everything. One mistake, and they'll spin the narrative against us. But if we're precise..." Her eyes hardened. I nodded, feeling a cold thrill run through me. Precision. Strategy. Control. 4 years, I had lived in chaos, forced to survive one blow at a time. Now I could dictate the terms. And as I glanced at Maris, I saw that same fire mirrored in her eyes. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were preparing to strike. By midday, we began visiting tenants, recording testimonies that painted the full scope of Dorsey's abuses. Mrs. Klein, who had first welcomed us weeks ago, described every intimidation tactic with trembling clarity. Families recounted eviction notices, threats, and constant harassment. Cameras captured the mold-infested apartments, the broken heaters, the ruined furniture left in the street. Each story was more damning than the last. Each video and photograph a nail in the coffin of Dorsey's empire. I sat quietly during the interviews, letting the tenants speak while I silently vowed. My father had no right to align himself with this man. The betrayal ran deep, bloodline versus morality, and I realized the strength of our position. Evidence stacked evidence, and with each account, I felt the power shift. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated us. And that was about to cost them everything. While we collected testimonies, Vivian worked tirelessly in the background to cross-reference financial records, exposing the hidden transactions between Dorsey Properties and my father. Each document revealed calculated manipulation, inflated rent, off-the-books payments, and deals designed to enrich my father at the expense of innocent tenants. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and satisfaction. For years, I had believed my father was untouchable, protected by respect, legacy, and carefully crafted appearances. But here was proof, undeniable and raw, that his hands were just as dirty as Dorsey's. I felt a flicker of vengeance ignite. This was more than exposing a cruel landlord. This was personal. Every spreadsheet, every signed note, every hidden contract told the story of betrayal, greed, and the privilege my father had exploited. And now, for the first time, I held the keys to turn it all against him. By evening, we were ready. Vivian had compiled a multimedia presentation. Videos, photos, documents, and witness statements arranged meticulously. We scheduled an emergency press conference, coordinated with journalists who had already started following the unfolding story. I looked at Maris, feeling the weight of our audacity. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. She nodded, gripping my hand tightly. "We've survived worse. We can do this." Harlan arrived to secure the building, ensuring no unexpected intruders could reach us. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of control. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by purpose. Tonight, the narrative would no longer be theirs to control. Tonight, the world would see the truth. And they would see my father for what he truly was. The press conference began in a room full of reporters and cameras, microphones jutting toward me like a forest of daggers. I stood at the podium, heart pounding but mind razor sharp. Vivian gave a subtle nod, signaling it was time. I began recounting the story. The evictions, the harassment, the collusion between Dorsey and my father. I presented the evidence. Photographs of damaged apartments, videos of tenants in fear, scanned documents detailing the transactions that had enriched my father while destroying others. Gasps echoed through the room. Cameras flashed relentlessly. I could feel the shift in energy, the room vibrating with disbelief, outrage, and support. For the first time, I realized that the power I held went beyond survival. It was the power of truth. Undeniable, unforgiving, and unstoppable. And the people in the room were witnesses. Hours later, after the story went live online, the backlash was immediate. Dorsey's PR team scrambled. My father's aides tried to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The documentation, videos, and testimonials were everywhere. Digital, permanent, viral. Social media campaigns erupted. Hashtags trending nationally, citizen outrage building. But with exposure came retaliation. My phone buzzed with threatening messages. Shadows appeared outside my building once more. Someone tried to tamper with our office locks. It was escalating. Yet amid the fear, I felt clarity. I had chosen this fight. I had embraced it fully. And as I looked at Maris and Vivian, I knew we were not only fighting for ourselves, but for every silenced voice. The war was intensifying, but for the first time, the odds felt like they were beginning to tip in our favor. And that tipped the scales of revenge. The morning after our press exposure, the city seemed to hum with tension. Social media was ablaze with reactions, both supportive and hostile. News outlets debated the veracity of my claims while simultaneously running defense pieces from Dorsey and my father. The coordinated smears were relentless. Headlines questioning my credibility, screenshots of old debts, insinuations about my character. My father appeared on several news networks, his voice calm, measured, and utterly merciless. "Ilara's allegations are fabricated," he said, gazing directly into the camera. "This is a personal vendetta, not a reflection of my business practices." My chest tightened. He hadn't just betrayed me once. He had weaponized his reputation, leveraging every ounce of influence he had to destroy me. Yet beneath my fear, a pulse of fury began to grow. Every lie he told, every smear he launched, became fuel for the fire I had been quietly stoking. They had started a war. So had I. Maris and I huddled in the office with Vivian, watching each new broadcast and headline with growing disbelief. "They're trying to control the narrative," Vivian said sharply, tapping the screen. "But they've underestimated you. Every time they lie, they expose themselves." My sister's hands trembled as she scrolled through emails and social media messages. Some were threats, others attempts to intimidate, warnings like, "Stop now or else," and "We know where you live." I swallowed hard, feeling the old fear claw at me, but I refused to let it take hold. "They think fear will work," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "But they don't know me. They never did." Vivian nodded approvingly, eyes fierce. "Good. Because fear only gives them power if you let it. We'll strike next, and we'll make sure they regret ever doubting you." That afternoon, Harlan arrived with grim news. "They're organizing a coordinated legal attack," he said, spreading folders across the conference table. Cease and desist letters, defamation claims, financial scrutiny. They're trying to trap you in every way possible. And your father is at the center of it. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. The man who had once held me as a child was now orchestrating an all-out campaign against me. I clenched my fists. Then we expose everything, I said. All of it. Every deal, every lie, every threat. Vivian's lips curved into a thin smile. Exactly. And we're going to make sure it's public, undeniable, and devastating. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about taking control, about revenge that hits harder than their lies. Maris's face hardened, her earlier fear replaced with resolve. Together, we felt the shift. We weren't victims of circumstance. We were the storm gathering strength. By evening, Vivian had coordinated a private meeting with former tenants willing to speak on camera, as well as whistleblowers from Dorsey Properties. Each interview revealed layers of deception I hadn't known existed. Illegal evictions, unreported maintenance disasters, bribery, and collusion. My father's involvement was staggering. He hadn't just turned a blind eye. He had actively profited. Every recorded statement, every document corroborating the tenant's claims was a hammer ready to fall. I listened to each story with a cold fury. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was justice for everyone my father and Dorsey had victimized. My rage solidified into clarity. Their power could only be dismantled publicly and decisively. And tonight, as the office lights burned late into the night, I began to plan the strike that would leave them exposed, cornered, and finally vulnerable. The next morning, we executed the plan. Vivian released a coordinated exposé to multiple media outlets simultaneously. Written reports, video compilations, interviews, and evidence-backed documents. I gave a personal statement alongside, recounting my story while emphasizing the systemic abuse tenants endured. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #WhitmoreExposed and #JusticeForTenants trended nationally. Calls poured in from citizens, activists, and journalists demanding accountability. The backlash was instantaneous. Dorsey's PR team scrambled, and my father's advisors rushed to spin the narrative. But the truth was everywhere. Unignorable. My father's face appeared on television once again, his expression tense, faltering under scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. The tide was turning. They had expected a quiet victim. Instead, they were facing an organized, relentless force of truth that left their lies crumbling under the weight of evidence. Even as the public sided with me, the personal threat escalated. Anonymous messages turned into physical attempts. Windows rattled in the night, tires slashed outside our office, and one night, someone left a note under the door with a single line. "You can't hide from blood." My pulse quickened each time I saw a shadow, each time the phone buzzed with an unknown number. Harlan increased security, but I knew that no protection could shield me from the betrayal of my own blood. My father was the true danger, his reach and influence extending far beyond Dorsey's immediate circle. Every step I took was being watched, every move calculated against me. And yet, in that danger, I felt an unfamiliar exhilaration. This was no longer survival. It was the hunt. I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing to strike in a way that would leave them exposed and humiliated. By the time night fell again, Vivian, Maris, and I were ready for the decisive phase. We had digital copies of everything, sworn statements, photographic evidence, and recorded interviews, all strategically prepared to release further if they escalated. I stood by the office window, watching the shadows of the city with cold clarity. "Tonight," I said softly to Maris, "we don't just survive. We take control." They think they're untouchable. They're about to learn otherwise. Maris nodded, eyes glinting with determination. Vivian checked the security cameras one last time, her expression hard. Outside, the wind rattled the broken blinds, carrying the city's hum. Somewhere in the darkness, Dorsey and my father were plotting, thinking they could corner me. I smiled grimly. Let them try. Because when they finally faced the truth, there would be no escape, no spin, and no forgiveness. And this time, the revenge would be mine. The day began with an electric sense of anticipation. Vivian had planned a meeting with key journalists, promising exclusive evidence that would blow the case wide open. Maris and I arrived early, each step echoing through the quiet lobby like a drumbeat of destiny. We carried our folders of evidence, videos, recordings, and documents, every piece a potential dagger aimed at Dorsey and my father. Vivian's eyes met mine as we set up in the press room. "They'll try to discredit everything," she said calmly. "But tonight, we make it impossible." I nodded, feeling my pulse accelerate. The months of fear, betrayal, and preparation culminated here. The trap wasn't physical. It was psychological, strategic, and public. By controlling the narrative, revealing incontrovertible proof, and anticipating every defensive move, we could corner the men who had tried to destroy me. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. The journalists arrived, cameras whirring and microphones extended like claws. Vivian led the room with precision, introducing me, explaining the story, and promising evidence that would leave no room for doubt. I felt my hands trembling as I adjusted my jacket, but my voice remained steady. "This is not about vengeance," I began, "but accountability. For the tenants, the families, and the people who were silenced for too long." The videos played on a large screen, tenants recounting abuse, photographs of damaged apartments, letters proving Dorsey and my father colluded to profit illegally. The room buzzed with energy, gasps, murmurs, and scribbling pens. I could feel the tide shifting. For months, I had been underestimated, silenced, and threatened. Now, with every story, every image, and every testimony displayed publicly, I could see the fear creeping into the eyes of those watching. The trap was working. Vivian leaned close and whispered, "Check this." On a laptop, she had prepared a live feed showing an email trail directly implicating my father in backroom deals with Dorsey, each message timestamped, revealing their meticulous planning. "We've cornered them digitally," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. I swallowed hard, realizing the audacity of what we were about to do. By exposing both men simultaneously, we forced their hands. If they tried to deny it, the evidence was overwhelming. If they tried to spin it, it was on record. I glanced at Maris, her eyes wide but resolute, and I felt a surge of power. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their attacks. I was orchestrating their downfall. The months of fear, betrayal, and preparation were culminating in this precise moment, where truth and strategy intersected, and I held the advantage. As the press conference continued, my father's PR team scrambled in real time, but Vivian anticipated each defensive maneuver. Emails, statements, and selective leaks designed to mislead reporters were countered with live updates from our evidence repository. Dorsey's advisors attempted to distract journalists with questions about minor lease discrepancies, but the room remained focused. Each attempt to spin the story only deepened the impression of guilt. I noticed Harlan standing silently by the back door, alert and ready to intervene if anyone escalated beyond the legal or professional boundary. It was a war of information manipulation and exposure, and for the first time I could see the impact. The men who had underestimated me, the ones who believed threats and smears could break me, were cornered. The trap had been set, and the pieces were moving exactly as we had designed. By mid-afternoon, the public response was staggering. Social media exploded with our evidence, screenshots, and videos, trending nationally under hashtags like #WhitmoreExposed and #DorseyExposed. Citizens, activists, and former tenants flooded news outlets with corroborating stories. The pressure on both Dorsey and my father became visible. On television, in real-time broadcasts, even in private offices where whispered panic replaced the usual calm authority. Vivian leaned over and murmured, "They thought they were untouchable. They didn't realize you had control." I nodded silently, my chest tight with a mix of fear, exhilaration, and determination. This wasn't just revenge, it was validation, exposure, and justice rolled into one. And the beauty of the trap was that it required no physical confrontation. Their reputation, influence, and ego were being dismantled in front of the world, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Even as the public responded, the personal threats persisted. A black SUV parked across the street from my office, shadows lingering in alleyways, anonymous messages escalating in intensity. Harlan had officers stationed strategically, but I realized that fear would always be part of the equation. I had to accept it, to channel it into calculated strategy instead of panic. Each threat became a prompt to tighten security, to anticipate moves, and to stay ahead of my adversaries. By nightfall, the press conference had concluded, but the impact was just beginning. News outlets ran full segments, social media was ablaze, and the evidence had become a permanent digital footprint, impossible to erase. And I felt it, the moment when fear shifted into empowerment, when the hunted became the hunter, and the predators realized their prey had become the storm. That night, as Maris and I sat in the quiet of the office, reviewing the day's events, Vivian's expression was satisfied but sharp. "They're reeling," she said, tapping the desk. "Expect retaliation, but we've gained control. They'll try again, but now they know you're not afraid, and you won't back down." I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. For months, I had lived in terror, reacting to threats and betrayals. Today, for the first time, I had dictated the terms. Dorsey and my father were exposed, vulnerable, and publicly cornered. And the trap, our precise, calculated, public exposure, was only the beginning. Tomorrow we would escalate, pushing them further, forcing them into mistakes that could no longer be hidden. I looked at Maris and Vivian and whispered, "This is just the start. We're far from finished." And for the first time, I felt truly unstoppable. The morning after our public exposé, the city seemed electric with anticipation. News outlets dissected every document, every video, and every tenant testimony. Dorsey and my father were scrambling behind closed doors, attempting damage control, but their panic was palpable. Anonymous tips and leaks continued to surface online, undermining every carefully crafted lie they tried to propagate. I watched the television in the office, Maris by my side, as my father appeared on a live broadcast. He looked exhausted, his composure faltering. "These allegations are misleading," he said, but his voice lacked the conviction of previous interviews. The cracks were visible. The trap we had set was working. Dorsey and Leonard Whitmore were no longer untouchable. For months, I had felt powerless. Today, I felt like the architect of justice. Every decision, every piece of evidence, every calculated release of information had pushed them closer to a fatal misstep. Vivian's eyes were sharp as she reviewed incoming media coverage. "They're panicking," she said. "Watch for mistakes. Under pressure, people always reveal more than they intend." Harlan had set up monitoring of their communications, tracking associates, financial moves, and legal maneuvers. Every misstep became our leverage. By midday, the first blunders appeared. My father's legal team filed a hastily drafted defamation claim, riddled with inaccuracies and contradictions. Simultaneously, Dorsey authorized a press release attempting to discredit tenants, but the statements were inconsistent with the documented evidence we had already publicized. Each error was like a domino falling, each crack in their carefully constructed armor widening. I felt a surge of vindication. They had underestimated me, assumed fear and threats would silence me, and now, under pressure, they were unraveling. The power dynamic had shifted completely. We were no longer on the defensive. By afternoon, Harlan called a secure meeting. "They're overextending," he said, urgency in his voice. "Every misstep is trackable. Every attempt to intimidate is documented. If we strike now, we can force them into a public collapse." Vivian's expression hardened. "We've built momentum. If we push, they'll stumble further and expose themselves fully. This is the point of no return." I nodded, adrenaline surging. Months of fear, betrayal, and meticulous preparation had led to this moment. I felt my pulse sharpen into determination. For the first time, revenge wasn't just reactive, it was proactive, strategic, and inevitable. "Let's do it," I whispered. Harlan briefed us on a coordinated release of evidence and witness statements that would coincide with live interviews, ensuring no counter-narrative could gain traction. Every move was calculated. Every step brought Dorsey and my father closer to defeat. The first major strike unfolded that evening. Journalists interviewed tenants who corroborated every claim. Financial records were released online, showing direct payments, collusion, and abuse of power. Live feeds displayed videos of Dorsey berating tenants while my father appeared in boardroom meetings approving schemes to exploit them. The evidence was irrefutable. I stood behind the cameras with Maris, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Months of fear, planning, and betrayal had culminated in a single, unstoppable wave. The city watched. Public opinion shifted decisively against my father and Dorsey. For once, the men who had sought to control the narrative and intimidate me were losing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Their carefully curated reputations began to crumble in real time, and the first whispers of accountability echoed like the opening notes of a long-awaited symphony of justice. Even as the public began to react, the personal stakes intensified. My father attempted direct interference through legal threats, But Vivian anticipated every maneuver. Dorsey's men tried to intimidate witnesses and journalists, only to be documented by Harlan's team. Every act of aggression against us strengthened our position, making the truth impossible to ignore. That night, I watched the skyline from the office, feeling the tension like a living thing. Each shadowed street, each unexpected knock, each anonymous call was a reminder that while the public exposure was our greatest weapon, vigilance remained crucial. I clenched my fists. They could threaten, intimidate, and smear, but they couldn't undo the evidence, the stories, or the truth. And as I looked at Maris and Vivian, I realized that we had reached the turning point. From hunted to hunter, from victim to architect of justice. By the following day, the consequences became undeniable. Social media campaigns exploded further. Citizen advocacy groups called for investigations, and journalists demanded accountability. Dorsey's and my father's allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to be caught in the backlash. Emails leaked showing panic within their inner circles, revealing discussions about hiding funds and discrediting witnesses. Acts now documented and publicly traceable. I felt a thrill of validation, tempered by the knowledge that the ultimate confrontation was approaching. This wasn't just exposure. It was dismantling. Every lie, every attempt to control, every betrayal had brought them to this point. And for the first time, I understood the depth of the power I had gained through strategy, perseverance, and an unwavering refusal to be silenced. That night, as Maris, Vivian, and I debriefed in the office, the scope of our victory became clear. Dorsey's public image was in tatters. My father's reputation, carefully built over decades, was crumbling. And yet, the final act of revenge, the one that would deliver them irreversibly into public disgrace, was still to come. I felt a pulse of anticipation, knowing that our patience and preparation had brought us here. Fear had been replaced by control, despair by determination, and victimhood by strategy. Vivian's eyes met mine. "Tomorrow," she said, "we finish it. The trap is set. They've walked into every corner we've prepared. Now we watch them fall." I nodded, feeling the weight of months of planning and betrayal settle into a precise sense of justice. Tomorrow, the storm would break. The morning sun filtered through the shattered blinds of our office, illuminating the meticulous chaos of weeks of planning. Today was the day. The final act of justice, the culmination of every sleepless night, betrayal, and calculated move. I stood with Maris and Vivian, staring at the mountain of evidence on the desk. Videos, photographs, financial records, tenant statements, all of it compiled into one precise, inescapable narrative. Harlan monitored the streets outside, every angle accounted for, every potential threat anticipated. My father's influence, Dorsey's power, their coordinated intimidation, it all came down to this. The trap we had laid was no longer just a plan. It was a living entity, ready to consume the men who had tried to destroy me. I felt a shiver of anticipation, my pulse steady beneath the adrenaline. Months of fear had transformed into this. Control, clarity, and the promise of poetic, irreversible revenge. The press conference began in a room packed with journalists, cameras, and microphones. I stepped forward, taking a deep breath. "My name is Alara Whitmore," I said, voice strong, resonant, unwavering. For months, I endured threats, betrayal, and intimidation at the hands of Dorsey Properties and my own father, Leonard Whitmore. Today that ends. The videos began to play, showing tenants describing abuse, images of uninhabitable apartments, and emails exposing collusion between Dorsey and my father. Gasps echoed through the room, reporters scribbled frantically, and the energy was electric. I glanced at Maris and Vivian, their faces steady and determined. For the first time, I truly understood the power of truth unleashed. The men who had tried to silence me had underestimated the one weapon they couldn't control. The narrative of the victims, now amplified, undeniable, and unstoppable. The storm we had built was here, and it was beautiful. As the evidence rolled across screens and social media simultaneously, the public reaction was immediate. Hashtags like #WhitmoreExposed and #DorseyExposed trended nationally. Journalists clamored for interviews, and citizens began demanding accountability. Dorsey's advisors panicked, my father's aides scrambled, and both men were caught publicly contradicting themselves, further amplifying their guilt. Harlan's team documented every moment, ensuring nothing could be disputed or manipulated. I felt a surge of vindication, tempered by the weight of every story we told. The families displaced, the children frightened, the tenants silenced for years. Revenge had transformed from personal vendetta into collective justice. Every lie they had told, every threat they had made, every betrayal they had orchestrated crumbled in front of the world. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The power to fight back, to expose truth, and to reclaim dignity could change everything. The most shocking moment came when a live feed showed my father's own words contradicting previous statements, directly tying him to illegal activities alongside Dorsey. The camera captured his faltering composure, the careful mask of respectability slipping, exposing the selfish, calculated man who had betrayed his own daughter. Dorsey's panic was equally visible. His men whispered urgently, the first cracks in their empire undeniable. The public witnessed every detail, and the impact was immediate. Emails leaked, documents surfaced, and within hours, both men were under investigation. The tension in the room was electric. Fear, vindication, and triumph coalescing into a single, cinematic crescendo. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not just for myself, but for every person whose voice had been silenced for too long. The predators had walked into the trap we had meticulously laid, and there was no escape. By evening, the world had changed. News cycles ran non-stop coverage of Dorsey and my father's exposure. Social media was alive with support, outrage, and solidarity. The tenants we had highlighted celebrated quietly in their homes, finally feeling seen. Maris hugged me tightly, her own tears spilling, whispering, "We did it." I held her, my heart full of relief and satisfaction. Vivian smiled faintly, exhaustion etched on her face. "This is the power of truth, strategy, and persistence," she said. Harlan nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and cautious vigilance. For the first time in months, I felt safe, not because fear had vanished, but because I had reclaimed control. The battle was over. The storm had passed, leaving clarity, justice, and a sense of poetic closure. And as I looked at the city skyline, I knew that nothing would ever silence me again. That night, I reflected on the journey, from eviction notices and threats to exposure and victory. Every betrayal, every sleepless night, every moment of fear had led to this cathartic, irreversible conclusion. My father's betrayal had hurt the deepest, but it had also sharpened my resolve, forging a strategic mind that had dismantled the very empire he had tried to protect. Dorsey's cruelty had lit the fire that fueled my meticulous planning. And Maris and Vivian, unwavering allies, had been my strength, my shield, and my conscience. Together, we had transformed fear into action, betrayal into strategy, and suffering into justice. The storm had broken, and in its wake, clarity, vindication, and empowerment remained. The final chapter of this nightmare had become the prologue of a story about resilience, courage, and the unrelenting power of truth. As we closed the office that night, I turned to the camera one last time, my voice steady and sincere. "This is more than my story," I said. "It's the story of every person who has been silenced, threatened, or betrayed. Never let anyone make you feel powerless. Stand up, speak your truth, and fight for justice." And if you've been inspired by this story, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of courage, resilience, and the triumph of truth. Together, we can amplify voices that have been silenced for too long. With that, I smiled faintly, the weight of months lifting from my shoulders. Justice had been served, revenge had been exacted, and the world was finally watching the truth unfold.